have fun.
Okay, hey, I'm Nate, and I'll talk about a new perspective on psychiatric disorders. But before I start my talk, I just want to do like a super quick experiment with you guys. So like, please participate. Maybe just put your beer down just for a second. It's going to be super quick. Okay. So what I would like you to do is do something that's going to sound a bit stupid, okay? But just take your index finger, okay? Can you show it? Okay. Let's take your index fingers. And when I tell you, please put it between your teeth like this. Okay? Just for a few seconds. Does everybody get it? Just take your index finger, put it in teeth. And I'll say like 3, 2, 1, let's do it. And just hold it in there until like I say so. Okay? 3, 2, 1, let's do it. Okay, great. Well done. A good participation. So I'll tell you why you had to do this, or why this is good for you, towards the end of the talk. But okay. Okay. Back to this new perspective on psychiatric treatment. So psychiatric disorders are an extremely big problem in our society. So basically 100% of people either have a psychiatric disorder or intimately know somebody who has it. So maybe you have it or just the person next to you. Yeah, I know, it's pretty tough. So obviously because of this, there's been quite a lot of attention going towards this, right? Like pharmaceutical companies are investing a lot of money in it. Research institutions are investing a lot of time in understanding them. But what are really psychiatric disorders? And especially, what are disorders of emotion, which I want to discuss a bit more today? So they're basically mental problems in which the emotional functioning is somehow impaired. So that means that maybe you're feeling wrong emotions at the wrong times. Maybe you're feeling emotions way too strongly, so when nothing really dangerous is happening, you feel extreme fear, or maybe you just don't feel any emotions. And of course, that's a problem. So, as I said, people are putting a lot of attention into this, and an bodily organ that has been identified with the power of modern medicine and neuroscience to be a pretty good target for trying to understand emotions or disorders and to treat these problems has been the brain. Okay? But the brain has some problems in this aspect, so it's kind of badly understood. Why is it badly understood? Well, it's extremely complicated. It consists of a lot of different cells that are very small. Duncan already said in the first talk, there's 100 billions of cells in a human brain. A lot of them very different from each other. The second problem is that the brain is very hard to access. So the brain is separated from the bloodstream by a blood-brain barrier, which is basically a barrier that prevents any weird chemicals from crossing into the brain, which is good in our normal functioning, but is not good when these chemicals are basically drugs that we want to get into the brain. So how can we approach the brain better or in a different way? So for now, what we're doing is we're basically creating drugs in a lab that we think might work, and even if you can get them to be delivered to the brain, often they actually have no effect, or they have the opposite effects of what we expect. So there's been some recent scandals, for example, regarding drugs for depression, which have been used by hundreds of millions of people in recent decades. And they have recently been shown to not be more effective than placebo, while at the same time having extremely negative side effects. So basically, could we find a new approach to dealing with this massive problem, with these disorders, without basically flooding the brain with some random chemicals with unpredictable consequences that in the end might not even work? Well, I think that we might. And the way we can approach this is by going back to the beginnings of psychology. And we can basically look into how pioneers of psychology of emotion have dealt with understanding what emotions actually are. So, in those times, basically 2 clubs formed in understanding how emotions function, which still exist today. The first club basically said, let's say you hear a funny joke. So the first club said, okay, so the most evolutionarily new part of our brain is called the cortex. So this is kind of this thinking part of our brain. So when we hear a funny joke, our cortex basically very accurately parses the content of this joke, identifies the funny twist, and basically gives an order to the muscles of our face saying, this was really funny, you better laugh because I want to show this to people. But the other club basically said, no, that's so stupid. Even though it makes a lot of sense, right? What they say is something that is extremely non-intuitive, but I think it has quite a lot of evidence to be true, at least partially. What they say is that when you hear a funny joke, it's not our cortex or a thinking brain that actually understands that the joke was funny. It's actually our deeper, way evolutionarily older parts of the brain that understand the funniness of the joke, basically, or the emotion behind it. And we immediately start laughing in response. And what our cortex actually does is our cortex knows that we just heard or read a joke and knows that we're laughing and says, well, I'm laughing, I mean, I guess I'm happy and I guess the joke was funny. So it's just interpreting the emotion that we're actually feeling without its involvement. So there's a considerable amount of evidence that this is actually a pretty good theory. So you remember the thing with the finger that we did just before? So this is one of the classical experiments that have been done to kind of investigate this theory. So what these people have proposed is that if we can just activate without doing anything to the brain, if we can just put the body in a position of an emotion, let's say you put a finger in our mouth. You can think and you can see that a lot of muscles that have activated are actually the muscles that activate when you're smiling. The same if you put a finger just above our mouth, like this. We basically make a frown. Yeah, it's a bit of a stupid face. We basically activate a lot of muscles that are associated with negative emotions. And what this actually does, which is to me quite fascinating, is without any real stimulus being present, it actually puts us in a sort of an emotional state. So people will actually feel this emotion, although faintly, for some minutes after they do this movement. And what's very interesting to me is that there's actually another piece of evidence for this. So people who are users of Botox, which basically inhibits your facial muscles, these people basically have quite severely impaired emotional functioning overall. So basically, perceiving these people when they perceive, like when they receive emotional stimuli, they just think they're nothing. They actually really subjectively, like they don't find them funny or sad or anything except if they're extremely strong. So what I'm proposing is that we can basically use this trick of the body seemingly being an important part of this cycle of feeling an emotion to basically break it. And actually this has been very successfully used in recent years. So people with phobias, like for example, there's a phobia of public speaking. So these people will sweat, heart will go crazy, they'll breathe like crazy when they have to give a public talk. But there's actually, I mean, it's not so bad, right? Well, how this was being solved in the old times, so like decades ago, is they would basically be given sedatives. So they would have problems moving, they would have problems speaking, they would basically be on sedatives. I mean, you can imagine how it looks like. But a modern solution, based on the theory I just gave you, is to basically give them a drug that doesn't touch their brain at all. This drug only prevents the action of adrenaline, which is basically a hormone released when you're in a stressed situation, and it basically prevents their heartbeat and their breathing rate from increasing. And it's kind of fascinating that just giving them this drug that doesn't do anything to their brains at all, it cannot even enter it, basically makes them calm and they can give great talks, and it also solves other phobias. So basically what I want you to take away from this talk is that the body is way more important for our emotional functioning than you might think. That there might be a better approach to basically solving psychiatric disorders that by flooding our brains with weird chemicals that we don't understand. And the last thing, when you're sad, just use your finger.